So far, Yvonne, we've seen the release of Agam Berger. She was brought out from the ruins of a house in the Jabalia camp in the north of Gaza, the area that's been largely destroyed by Israel's assault. She was put on a stage and paraded by Hamas militants, forced to wave, for the cameras and for the crowd, before she was handed over to the Red Cross and driven to an Israeli military position inside Gaza. And from there, the Israeli military and security services have taken her out to a kibbutz on the outskirts of Gaza, where she was reunited with her family, and she's now expected to be transferred to a hospital inside Israel, and she'll also get to meet the other Israeli military spotters, the female spotters who were released as part of an earlier prisoner and hostage exchange between Israel and Hamas. And what we're also seeing is in the south of Gaza, in Khan Younis, as you mentioned, there's preparations underway for the release of two civilian hostages, 80-year-old Gadi Moses and 29-year-old Arbel Yahud. They are being held by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another militant group inside Gaza. The holding of Arbel Yahud by Islamic Jihad complicated the implementation of the ceasefire deal, because Hamas was supposed to release Arbel Yahud as a female civilian as part of an earlier prisoner and hostage exchange. Couldn't do it because it didn't actually hold her. After negotiating with Islamic Jihad, they've managed to secure her release now, and that looks like it's going to take place sometime in the next few minutes.
Well, Eric, the release is outside the scope of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Tell us, why is this happening?
So because Hamas wasn't able to release Arbel Yahud as part of the earlier exchange, they were meant to release the female civilians as part of an agreed list. They then had to go to Islamic Jihad and negotiate for her release. And Israel then claimed that was a violation of the ceasefire deal by Hamas and delayed the opening of the Netzarim corridor. That's the military line that Israel has established in the centre of Gaza, and it prevented Palestinian civilians from returning from the south to their homes in the north. Once Hamas had said it had secured Arbel Yahud's release, Israel opened up some of the roads in the Netzarim corridor for Palestinians to pass through and return to their homes. So she's actually turned out to be quite an important part of the ceasefire implementation, but this release today is an extra release beyond those agreed as part of the schedule of the ceasefire. And then on top of that, Hamas is going to release 5 of these Thai farm workers that were also captured during the October 7 attacks. And there's no exchange for those because they're not Israeli hostages. Hamas says it's just releasing them as a gesture of goodwill. The Thai government has been advocating for their return for some time. They were one of around 30 farm workers. There were 5 of around 30 farm workers who were captured by militants on October the 7th, and there's still a couple of farm workers being held inside Gaza, 2 of which are thought to have been killed.
Well, Israel is releasing 110 Palestinian prisoners and administrative detainees into the West Bank and Gaza in return for Israeli hostages. What can you tell us about that?
So it looks like a number will go to East Jerusalem and some will go to the West Bank and some into Gaza. Of those, 20, some who are serving the most sentences for the most serious crimes, are expected to be immediately deported, presumably to Egypt. So they'll be released into Gaza and then immediately deported. They're not allowed to remain in the Palestinian territories. Most of the people being released are men who were imprisoned during the Second Intifada. A large number, more than 40, are actually members of Fatah, the Palestinian political party movement that is the main rival to Hamas in Palestinian politics. So it's interesting that Hamas negotiated for their release as well. And a number, as you mentioned, are going to be administrative detainees, so people who haven't yet been charged or convicted but have been taken into custody by Israeli security services. And what's important to note is that Israeli security services, the military, the domestic security service, the internal security service, have already arrested more Palestinians ahead of this release. They say they've arrested the instigators of protests and demonstrations inside the West Bank during the earlier hostages, the earlier prisoner releases. So already more Palestinians have been taken into custody preemptively by Israeli security services and the Israeli military, even as Israel goes ahead and releases a number of Palestinian prisoners today.
And lastly, Eric, an Israeli ban on the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinians comes into effect today. What will that mean for Palestinians?
This has potentially huge implications because UNRWA, as it's known, is one of the UN's oldest agencies, and it's the primary relief agency for Palestinians. So it provides most of the primary services for Palestinians like education and medical care, and it's responsible for around half of the total aid effort inside Gaza, where we know there's a humanitarian crisis. So, for example, UNRWA provides 60% of the food to Palestinians inside Gaza. It provides most of the primary medical care. So we don't know exactly how that's going to continue and who's going to pick up that slack. Here in Jerusalem, there's going to be parts of East Jerusalem where UNRWA is the primary medical and education provider. We don't know if those sites are going to continue to operate. We don't know what's going to happen to the aid that is marked for importation by UNRWA, because the law prohibits contact and coordination between Israeli officials and UNRWA. So will they refuse to import that aid? Will it have to be relabeled and sent to other aid groups and then transferred to UNRWA? Already, the foreign staff working for UNRWA have been forced to leave Israel. Their visas have been cancelled, and some have been forced to leave Gaza. So it's unclear how UNRWA is going to be able to operate, and we know that it is the major aid provider to Palestinians, and we know that the economic situation in the West Bank is dire, and the humanitarian situation, which is being sustained by UNRWA's aid efforts in Gaza, has been described at various stages of this conflict as catastrophic. So the implications are potentially huge, and we're going to see in the next few days how that works.
Eric Tlozek in Jerusalem, thanks for that update.